The ballroom went quiet the moment Amara Okoye took the microphone. Not politely quiet, graveyard quiet. The kind of silence that happens when 500 people are holding their breath at the same time because they all know something is about to explode. She was the ex-girlfriend. She was the sister. She was the woman whose entire world had been dismantled from the inside. And she was standing at the wedding reception of the man who destroyed her, holding a champagne glass like she owned the room. Every camera in that ballroom tilted toward her face. Every pair of eyes waited for the detonation. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them felt like losing your own skeleton, stay with me until the end of this story. Like this video, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. 3 months before the wedding, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did in late autumn, drowning itself in cold rain and pretending it was beautiful. Amara stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse on the 43rd floor, watching the Han River turn black under a sky that couldn't decide whether to storm or just threaten. She had a pencil behind her ear and a set of blueprints spread across the dining table that had been cleared of the dinner neither of them had eaten. The pencil had been there for 2 hours. She hadn't touched it. Behind her, she could hear Tae-hyun moving through the kitchen. The particular sound of him, the quiet deliberateness, the way he never rushed, never clattered, never made noise like someone who was nervous. She had loved that about him once. Now it just made her feel watched. She said, without turning around, "The Incheon firm called again." No answer. "They want an answer by Friday." She pressed her fingertip to a corner of the blueprint, smoothing down a curl in the paper. "I told them I needed to talk to you first." The sound from the kitchen stopped. She turned then. Kang Tae-hyun was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, holding a glass of water he hadn't drunk. He was still in his suit, no tie, collar open 2 buttons. He was 31 years old and he looked like someone who had been carrying a confession around in his coat pocket for so long it had worn a hole through the lining. Amara had known him for 4 years. She knew every variation of his silence. She knew the silence of a man thinking, the silence of a man calculating, the silence of a man preparing to give an order someone wasn't going to like. She had never seen this particular silence before. It was the silence of someone who had already made a decision and was only now gathering the nerve to say it out loud. Her stomach dropped before her brain caught up. "Tae-hyun!" He set the glass down on the counter behind him, carefully. Like even the sound of it touching the granite needed to be controlled. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay. I've been—" He stopped. Started again. "There's something I should have said before now. I didn't, because I kept thinking it would—" Another stop. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "I'm not going to insult you by telling you it means nothing, or that I didn't choose it, because I did." The blueprints on the table behind her suddenly felt very far away. The Incheon job. The Friday deadline. All of it receding like a tide going out. "Say it straight," Amara said. Her voice came out steadier than anything happening inside her chest. "My feelings have changed." The rain hit the window. A taxi horn bleated 43 floors below. "Changed," she repeated. "I fell in love with someone else." There it was. 6 words. The kind that don't sound like much until they rearrange every piece of furniture in every room you've ever lived in. Amara didn't scream. She had always hated the version of herself she imagined in scenarios like this. The one who threw things, the one who collapsed, the one who made it easy for the other person to feel like they'd been justified in leaving. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm hard enough to feel it and stayed where she was. "Who?" she said. Not a question, a command. Tae-hyun looked at her steadily. He owed her that much and he knew it. "I'm not going to tell you tonight. That's not your call." "Amara, you don't get to decide what I know and when I know it. Not anymore." She took one breath. "Who?" His jaw moved. He looked genuinely pained, which, under different circumstances, she might have found interesting, since Kang Tae-hyun was not a man who showed pain easily. He had built his criminal organization at 24 years old. He had survived 2 assassination attempts before he was 30. She had watched him sit through a bullet wound in his left shoulder while his lieutenants panicked around him, and she had watched his face stay exactly as calm as it was right now. But he wasn't going to tell her. She could see it. Whatever the reason, guilt, strategy, some strange tenderness she no longer had claim to, he had made that decision and he was going to keep it. "Fine," she said. She walked past him to the bedroom. She pulled the largest suitcase from the closet, the one she used for international trips, and she put it open on the bed. She started folding clothes into it, not frantically, methodically, the way she approached every structural problem she'd ever faced. Identify the load-bearing elements, move systematically, don't collapse anything you need to walk through later. Taehyun appeared in the doorway. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said. "Where do you suggest I go instead?" She didn't look at him. She lifted a stack of sweaters from the shelf. "Should I just get in bed and pretend we talked about the Incheon job?" "Amara, don't." She set the sweaters in the suitcase. "Don't use my name like it costs you something." He was quiet. "You've been sharing a bed with me," she said, still not looking at him. "For how long?" "That's not... How long, Taehyun?" The silence stretched long enough that she got her answer without needing words. She zipped one section of the suitcase, moved to the closet, took her blazers off their hangers one by one. "The penthouse is in my name," he said finally. "You can stay. I'm not staying in your apartment." She turned around then, blazers folded over her arm, and for the first time since he'd said it, she let herself look at him directly. Not to hurt him, not to make him feel something, just to make sure he understood what he was looking at. "I'm going to Zuri's. Don't call me tonight." Something crossed his face. Fast. Gone before she could name it. "Okay," he said. She finished packing in silence. She took a cab to her sister's apartment in Mapogu. The rain had gotten worse, and the cab driver had the radio playing something low and indistinct, a melody she didn't recognize that kept trying to resolve into a chorus and never quite getting there. She watched the city lights blur through the wet glass and tried to take inventory of what she was feeling. Shock. Yes. Grief. Already. Like her body had received the message before her head finished processing it. And underneath both of those, quieter and more dangerous, a formless shape she couldn't name yet. Something that wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite shame, and wasn't quite the specific loneliness of being left. Something that felt almost like recognition. Like a part of her had always been waiting for this particular weight to fall. She had been with Taehyun for 4 years. She had known, going in, what he was. She wasn't naive. She had sat in rooms with his people and watched transactions happen that she didn't ask about and pretended a version of normal that was always slightly tilted. She had told herself that he had never brought that world into what they were together, and for a long time that had been almost true. She had told herself that the control he exercised over every room he walked into was something different when it was directed at her, a tenderness instead of a mechanism. Now she was in a cab in the rain, trying to figure out which of those things she'd actually believed and which ones she'd just needed. Zuri's building was a narrow mid-rise in a quieter neighborhood. 3rd floor, apartment 308. Amara had helped her younger sister find the place 2 years ago when Zuri finished her graduate degree, had helped her furnish it, had argued with her about the sofa color, had spent 3 Sundays helping her assemble flat-pack furniture with instructions that appeared to have been translated by someone hostile to both Korean and English. She knocked. There was a long pause before the door opened, long enough that she noticed it, long enough to matter, later. Then the door opened and Zuri was there in an oversized sleep shirt, dark eyes going wide at the sight of Amara standing in the rain-damp hallway with a suitcase and a face she was still trying to hold together. "Uni, can I stay?" Amara asked. "Just for a few days." Zuri's expression moved through something complex in the space of a second. Fear, Amara registered without knowing why. Then it resolved into something warmer, and her younger sister stepped back and said, "Of course. Come inside." In the weeks that followed, Amara lived inside the architecture of falling apart, while still showing up to everything that required her to stand upright. She went to work. She was a senior project architect at a firm with enough ongoing commissions to require her to perform functionality every day from 8 to 6, which was its own brutal mercy. She had always been someone who could use work as a dam, let the structure of deadlines hold back whatever was trying to flood through her. She used it now. She stayed late. She took on a residential tower review that she probably should have passed to a junior architect. She sat in client meetings and pointed at load calculations and spoke in complete sentences, and none of it required her to feel anything. Evenings were harder. At Zuri's apartment, she told herself she was giving her younger sister space. In reality, she was managing a grief that required extremely careful handling because she could feel it was the kind that would knock down everything around it, if she let it move freely. She did not cry for the first 2 weeks. She was not proud of this. It was not strength. It was more like the physiological response of someone in a car crash who doesn't feel the injury until hours later, when the adrenaline clears and suddenly every piece of damage announces itself at once. Zuri was careful around her, careful in a way that would have read as loving to anyone who wasn't Amara, but Amara knew her sister's texture. She knew the difference between Zuri being gentle because she was worried about Amara, and Zuri being gentle because she was trying not to break something she was already holding. The distinction was small. She noticed it. She filed it somewhere she wasn't ready to open yet. One night she came home to find Zuri sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her, the look of someone who had just put it down quickly. Amara asked if she was okay. Zuri said yes too fast and immediately asked if Amara was hungry. Amara said yes, she was hungry. They ate leftover rice and watched a drama neither of them paid attention to, and Amara watched her younger sister laugh at a joke on screen and thought, she is trying so hard to make this feel normal. Good sister. She's a good sister. She believed it. Right up until she didn't. Iket. The Inchin firm got tired of waiting and hired someone else for the position she hadn't answered about. Her director told her in a meeting that there were 3 other international leads she should be considering, a statement that meant he had noticed she was operating at 2/3 capacity and was managing her rather than pushing her. She told him she'd look at the files. She did not look at the files. She ran in the mornings along the Han River before the city got loud, when the light on the water was still gray and indifferent, and there were only other runners and the occasional delivery driver in the indifferent sky. Running did not make her feel better. It made her feel physical, which was different. She had a body, and it moved and it hurt when she pushed it. This was useful. The body's complaints were simple. They did not require interpretation. One morning she ran for 60 minutes, and then sat on a bench near the Mapo Bridge and watched the river and allowed herself to think about him with the guardrails off for exactly 10 minutes. She had read somewhere that grief required a container, that if you gave it a bounded time, it was less likely to leak into everything else. She thought about his hands. That was the specific detail her memory kept landing on. He had precise hands, large and still, the hands of someone who'd been trained early to be careful about what he touched and how. She thought about the way he used to set his coffee down with both hands wrapped around the mug in the morning, the single human gesture that had felt entirely separate from the version of him that the rest of the world feared. She thought about the future she had let herself imagine, which she was embarrassed to realize she had imagined quite specifically, the apartment in a quieter neighborhood, the light in the mornings, the work she would do while he ran whatever part of the city he controlled, 2 people moving in parallel lines that kept choosing to intersect. She sat with it for 10 minutes. Then she stood up and ran back. The night everything changed was ordinary, right up until it wasn't. Zuri had texted her in the afternoon to say she'd be home late from campus. Amara had come back to the apartment, showered, eaten something standing over the kitchen counter, and was halfway through reviewing blueprints for a residential commission when she heard the key in the door. She looked up. Zuri came in first. Her face was doing something that Amara had never seen before. A combination of terror and apology, and something that might have been the expression of someone walking toward the thing they'd been running from and finally deciding to stop running. Then Tae-hyun stepped through the doorway behind her. The room went strange. The air pressure seemed to shift. Amara was aware of very specific things in very specific order. The blueprints on the table in front of her, the mug of cold coffee to her left, the fact that she was wearing her old university sweatshirt with a tear at the right elbow, the particular quality of her sister's breathing. Then she saw Zuri's left hand. The ring caught the light. Not a small ring, not ambiguous. A diamond solitaire on a band that caught the light from the kitchen and threw it back across the ceiling like a small, brutal signal. Amara looked at the ring, looked at Zuri, looked at Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun was watching her the way people watch a structure for the first sign of collapse. Focused and still and prepared, she understood now for the possibility that she was about to come apart. Something gathered in her chest and then crystallized. Not rage, not grief. Something colder and more complete than either of those. An understanding so total that it felt almost like weightlessness. Everything from the past 6 weeks rearranged itself in the span of 2 seconds. Every slightly too long pause, every quickly flipped phone, every moment of Zuri being careful in a way that was one layer too many for someone who was just being a good sister to a heartbroken woman. Amara set her pencil down on the blueprints. "How long?" she said. Not a question. not a number she was actually asking for, a decision she was making about what kind of air she wanted the next few minutes to breathe. Zuri's face collapsed. Taehyun spoke first. Amara, I am not talking to you right now. She looked at her sister. Zuri. Zuri pressed her ringed hand against her sternum. Uni, she said, and her voice broke in the middle of the word, cracked like something structural that had been bearing load it wasn't built for. I'm so... Don't. Amara heard her own voice from a strange distance, level, almost gentle. Don't apologize yet, just... She exhaled. Sit down. Zuri sat. She dropped into the chair across from Amara like her legs had stopped being able to make the decision, and she pressed both hands over her face, and the sound that came out of her was not crying exactly. It was the sound of someone who had been holding a secret that was larger than their body and had just set it down. Taehyun remained standing near the door, arms at his sides, letting her take whatever she needed to take. I need you to leave, Amara told him. I want to... I know what you want. She looked at him directly. Leave. I'll talk to you another time. He looked at Zuri, who still had her face in her hands. He looked back at Amara. Then he nodded once, the same small nod he used to acknowledge information in rooms full of men who feared him, and he turned and walked out. And the door closed behind him with a sound so quiet it was almost worse than if he'd slammed it. In the silence that followed, Amara could hear the city outside, traffic 3 floors below, someone's television through the wall, all the ordinary sound of the world continuing to run itself. Zuri lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were wrecked. She looked 20 years old, which was how she had looked when their mother died, and Amara had held her for 3 hours straight in the back room of a hospital in Atlanta without saying a single thing, because there was nothing to say. How long? Amara said again. Quieter now. Zuri swallowed. 8 months. 8 months. 6 weeks ago, Taehyun had told Amara his feelings had changed. 8 months was 2 months before that. 8 months was the summer. August. When Amara had been working on the waterfront development project in Busan for 3 weeks and calling Zuri every other night to catch up, and Zuri had sounded distracted on the phone, and Amara had figured she was stressed about her dissertation. August. Okay, Amara said. Honey, I know. I said okay. She stood up. Her legs worked. She was relieved by this. She went to the kitchen and stood at the counter with her back to the room and looked out the small window at the building across the alley. A woman on the 4th floor opposite was washing dishes. Normal, ordinary, the world going on. She ran both hands over her face, pressed her palms hard against her eyes. The thing about the kind of pain that makes your vision blur is that it always surprises you with its specificity. She was not thinking about Taehyun in this moment. She was thinking about August. She was thinking about the phone calls and the specific sound of Zuri's voice and the fact that she had heard something and named it wrong. She was thinking about the 6 weeks she'd spent in this apartment, letting her sister take care of her while her sister was carrying this, and what that cost must have been, and whether she would have wanted Zuri to carry it or wished she'd been told sooner, and discovering that she genuinely did not know the answer. She turned around. Zuri was watching her from across the room with the expression of someone prepared to absorb whatever came next. The ring was still on her hand, glinting quietly. I love you, Amara said. Zuri blinked. I'm furious, Amara continued, and I don't know how long that's going to last. And I need you to understand that this is... She stopped, steadied. This is going to take me a long time to work through. I know. Zuri's voice was barely there. I know. But I love you. She crossed the room and she held out her arms, and her younger sister stood and walked into them, and Amara held Zuri while Zuri cried, and Amara did not cry. Not yet. Not in front of her, because someone always had to hold the structure up, and that had always been Amara's job, and old habits don't let go of you just because everything else has. She stood there holding her sister and looked over Zuri's shoulder at the blueprints on the table, and the cold coffee, and the life she had been trying to rebuild, and she understood with cold, complete clarity that the building she'd been drawing no longer matched the ground it was standing on. She would have to start over. Every line, every load, every calculation. That was okay. She knew how to build from scratch. What she didn't know yet, what she was still too close to see, was that in 3 months she would be standing in the ballroom of Seoul's most exclusive hotel with a champagne glass in her hand and 500 people waiting for her to destroy everything within reach. And she would make a choice that none of them would see coming. The weeks between that night and the wedding were a kind of controlled demolition that Amara managed from the inside out. She moved back to her own apartment, a clean one-bedroom in Yongsan that she'd kept through the entire time she'd lived in Tae-hyun's penthouse, the way some people keep a second pair of shoes in their office for emergencies. She had always known, she understood now, that she would eventually need the exit. She changed her running route. She found a cafe near her building where she could sit for 2 hours on Saturday mornings without seeing anyone she recognized. She answered her work emails within 20 minutes. She reviewed the 3 international position files her director had sent and identified the one in London as the most structurally interesting, a mixed-use development along the South Bank, complex engineering requirements, a client firm with a reputation she respected. She did not contact Tae-hyun. He contacted her once, 2 weeks after the night in Zuri's apartment. A message, not a call. He was direct about it in the way she had always appreciated. He said he was sorry for the way things had unfolded, that there was no version of this that wasn't his fault, and that if she wanted to talk at any point before the wedding, he would come to wherever she was. She read it 3 times. She did not respond. Zuri called her every day, some days twice. The calls were careful at first, short, surface level, Zuri asking questions she already knew the answer to, like whether Amara had eaten and whether she was sleeping. Then gradually, they got longer. Zuri started telling her things about the wedding planning, about the venue, about the specific shade of ivory she'd chosen for the dress, because it was the same color as the dress Amara had worn to a cousin's wedding 6 years ago that Zuri had said was the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen. Amara sat with that information for a moment and then asked what flowers she'd chosen. Zuri said white peonies and something called lysianthus. Amara said that was a good choice. And then she was in the wedding planning. Not all the way in. Not with both feet. Not without knowing what she was choosing every time she said yes to another piece of it, but in. Helping Zuri choose centerpieces. Sitting in on a menu tasting at the hotel because their mother was not alive to do it. Finding herself standing in a bridal shop holding a piece of tulle while Zuri's seamstress adjusted the hem, and Zuri stood on a small platform trying not to cry because she was overwhelmed, and also because she felt guilty, and also because she had always been the kind of person who felt everything at maximum volume, and it was genuinely exhausting to be her, a fact Amara had understood for 23 years. "You don't have to be here," Zuri said during the 3rd dress fitting. "I mean it, Unnie. You don't owe me this." "I know," Amara said. "Then why are you?" Amara looked at her sister in the mirror, the white dress, the tulle, the carefully controlled expression on Zuri's face that was trying very hard not to be a question. "Because you're getting married," Amara said, "and nobody else who loves you is here to help you do that." Zuri pressed her lips together hard, looked away. "Besides," Amara said, "that seam on the left shoulder is going to pull when you lift your arm. Tell your seamstress." Taehyun's security team ran the wedding venue logistics with the same cold efficiency they used for everything else. The hotel was booked under a subsidiary company name. The guest list had been vetted. The exits were mapped. 3 of the men at the venue who appeared to be hotel staff were not hotel staff. Amara arrived at the hotel the morning of the wedding to help Zuri with final preparations. She spent an hour doing what an older sister does, managing small catastrophes that had magnified in Zuri's already overwhelmed mind to the scale of genuine disasters. A florist who was 40 minutes late, a bridesmaid whose dress zipper had partially separated at the seam, the wrong champagne delivered to the bridal suite. She solved each problem, quietly, completely. At 11 that morning, she allowed herself 30 minutes in the bathroom of the bridal suite, door closed, sitting on the tile floor with her back against the bathtub. She breathed. She looked at the white ceiling, and she thought about the first time she had understood, fully, that she was going to lose Tae-hyun. Not the night he told her, not the night she saw the ring, but a morning in between those things when she had woken up alone in her apartment and reached across the bed automatically and felt the empty space and understood in her body before her mind that the person her nervous system had been expecting was never going to be there again. She gave herself 30 minutes. Then she stood up, checked her face in the mirror, and went back to work. The ceremony was at 6 in the evening. The ballroom was exactly what money and power looked like when they cooperated without restraint. Crystal chandeliers, flowers that must have cost as much as a small apartment, the contained and slightly predatory elegance of 500 guests who all understood that the occasion required them to perform normalcy for a few hours. Amara sat in the front row on the bride's side. She watched Tae-hyun stand at the altar. She watched him from the side, his profile, the particular stillness of him in his wedding suit. She had looked at that profile across pillows and across conference tables and across difficult silences, and she had loved it with the specific intensity of someone who doesn't fall in love often. She noted this without judgment, a structural observation. This is what was built here. This is what stands now. Then the music changed and everyone stood, and Zuri appeared at the entrance to the ballroom on the arm of their uncle, who had flown in from Atlanta, and Amara watched her younger sister walk toward the altar in the white dress and understood that the complexity of loving someone does not simplify itself into a single emotion just because you need it to. She felt pride and grief and fury and tenderness and something else that had no name. All of it at the same time. All of it fully. She stood and she watched, and she did not look away. When Zuri reached the altar and turned, her eyes found Amara's immediately. The expression on her face was not the expression of a bride. It was the expression of a child who had done something unforgivable and was discovering that the person they needed most had not left anyway. Amara held her gaze, gave the smallest nod. Zuri's eyes filled, but did not spill. She turned to face the man she was marrying. The reception unfolded around Amara like weather, something she moved through without being its cause or its target. She spoke to the uncle from Atlanta. She spoke to 2 women from Zuri's graduate program. She declined 3 glasses of champagne before accepting the 4th, which she held without drinking. She did not speak to Tae-hyun. She watched him across the room. He was performing the role of groom with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else. He shook hands. He laughed at things that required laughing at. He held Zuri's hand with the deliberate care of someone who understood, at least on a functional level, how to be gentle with things that were fragile. Once, across the room, he looked at her. It lasted 3 seconds. He did not look away first. Neither did she. Then someone spoke to him, and he turned, and that was that. Later, a hotel staff member approached her with a small folded card. Inside, in handwriting, she recognized, "I would like you to say something. If you're willing, no obligation." She turned the card over, looked at the blank back of it for a moment. She stood up and found the hotel coordinator and said she would be delivering a short toast. The coordinator looked briefly alarmed, then composed. Amara returned to her seat and spent 20 minutes deciding what she would say. What she landed on was this. She would tell the truth. Not the whole truth, not the version of truth that was a weapon, but the truth that was actually true. The one that existed before all of this, underneath all of this. The thing that neither the betrayal nor the grief had managed to touch. When the toastmaster called her name, she walked to the front of the room. The ballroom fell silent. Not politely silent, graveyard silent. The kind of silence that happens when 500 people are holding their breath at the same time because they all know something is about to explode. Amara took the microphone. She looked at the champagne glass in her other hand. She looked out at the sea of faces. The politicians, the CEOs, the men she recognized as leaders of organizations that operated in the space between law and whatever came after law, every one of them watching her with the focused attention of people trying to calculate the blast radius. She let them wait 1 more second. Then she looked at her sister. "When Zuri was 4 years old," she began, "there was a thunderstorm that knocked the power out in our apartment in Atlanta for 6 hours. It was summer. It was hot and dark, and the thunder was the kind you feel in your back teeth." Her voice was even. She was a little surprised by this. She crawled into my bed and she held onto my arm and she said, "Uni, what if the sky breaks?" And I told her the sky didn't break, that the noise was just the sky rearranging itself, figuring out what it needed to be. Silence in the room, the kind you can feel. "I have watched Zuri Okoye become a woman," Amara continued. "I watched her when she had nothing to be proud of, and I watched her when she had everything. I know every version of her, including the ones she's not proud of, including the ones that were hard to love." A shift in the room, barely perceptible. 500 people recalibrating. And I am standing here tonight to tell her, in front of every person in this room, that I love every version. She looked directly at her sister. Zuri's face was a disaster. That love doesn't have conditions attached to it, and that I want her to build a life that makes her so happy she forgets to be afraid. She shifted her gaze to Tae-hyun. He was looking at her. "Kang Tae-hyun," she said, and his name in her mouth felt like handling something precise and sharp that had to be handled exactly right. "My sister has a heart that takes everything at full volume. She has never known how to be halfway about anything." A pause. "Take care of that. Because the people who feel everything that much are the ones who break the most completely when someone doesn't. She lifted her glass. To Zuri, she said. The sky didn't break. She drank. The room erupted. And in the noise and the motion and the 200 people suddenly reaching for their own glasses, Amara lowered her champagne and looked one more time at Taehyun's face and saw what was there. Not relief, not gratitude, something harder to name than either of those. And she understood that she had not given that toast for him, had not given it for the room. She had given it for the 4-year-old girl in the dark who used to hold on to her arm, and she had given it for herself. For the version of herself that needed to know she was still capable of choosing something other than destruction. What she did not give herself, not yet, not in that room, was permission to fall apart. That was still coming. But first, there was a rooftop, and a conversation she had not seen coming, one that was already walking toward her from across the room in the body of her younger sister, who had just excused herself from her own wedding reception and was moving through the crowd with the specific expression of someone who has decided they cannot keep carrying what they are carrying for one more minute. Amara set her empty glass down on the nearest table. She did not run. She waited, because Zuri had always come to her in the end, and some things you don't break just because everything else has. Zuri cut through the reception crowd like someone who had made a decision mid-step and was not going to stop moving until the decision was completed. Amara tracked her from across the room. She watched the way her sister moved. Not the careful, performance-ready movement of a bride at her own reception, but something stripped of all that, urgent and slightly unsteady, the way people move when the thing they've been holding finally gets too heavy. Guests parted for her automatically. Nobody stops a bride in motion. Nobody asks questions. Amara set down her empty champagne glass and followed. The corridor outside the ballroom was a different world. Carpeted, overlit, the noise of 500 people muffled to something that sounded almost peaceful from out here. A hotel staff member with a clipboard glanced at Amara and then looked away. 2 of Taehyun's men were stationed at the corridor junction, and they tracked her with their eyes without moving anything else. She had learned over 4 years how to walk through those gazes without acknowledging them. It was a skill she was not proud of having developed. Zuri was ahead of her, pushing through a door marked stairwell. Amara followed her through it. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and the specific quiet of a place that wasn't meant to be used by anyone who mattered. Zuri had stopped on the landing between the reception floor and the floor above, her back against the wall, her wedding dress gathered in both hands like she was trying to keep it from the floor. Her eyes were already ruined. She'd given up on the makeup sometime after the toast. For a moment, they just looked at each other. I can't go back in there, Zuri said. Okay. I mean it. I can't go back in there and stand next to him and smile at people, like I didn't. She stopped, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Like I didn't do exactly what I did. You're going to have to, Amara said. Not right now, but tonight. How? Not a question. A genuine request for information she didn't have. The same way you've been doing everything else for the last 8 months. Amara kept her voice even. You put one foot in front of the other and you don't look too far ahead. Zuri made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. That's what you do. That's not what I do. I'm not built like you. I know. I feel everything. I know that too. Then you know that standing in that room is... She exhaled, ragged. It's like being on fire and being asked to hold still so nobody notices. Amara looked at her younger sister, the white dress, the ruined eyes, the diamond ring on her left hand that caught even the fluorescent stairwell light and threw it back. She thought about the toast she had just delivered, about the word she had chosen, love. And she tested whether she still meant it. She did, furiously, both things at the same time. Come here, she said. Zuri came off the wall and into her arms, and Amara held her for 30 seconds, one hand on the back of her sister's head, feeling the small shaking in Zuri's shoulders that meant she was crying, but trying not to be. I need to ask you something, Amara said, against her sister's hair. Zuri went still. And I need you to answer me honestly. Not the answer you think I need. The actual truth. A pause. Then, okay? Amara stepped back, held Zuri at arm's length by both shoulders, looked at her directly. Do you love him? Zuri's face didn't change, which was its own answer. The expression of someone for whom the question lands in a place beyond performance. Yes, she said, and her voice was terrible with it, rough and certain, and ashamed and certain anyway. Amara nodded. "Then go back in there," she said, "and be his wife, because that's what you chose, and you're going to live with that choice for a long time. And the only way through it is through it. And you? What about me? How do you—" Zuri's voice cracked. How are you this calm? How are you standing here in this stairwell telling me to go be with the man who we both— Don't, Amara said quietly. I need to understand how you do it. You don't. She released her sister's shoulders, smoothed the front of Zuri's dress where her grip had pressed the fabric. That's mine to figure out, not yours. You don't get to use my coping mechanism as a reason to feel better about yourself tonight. The words landed and Zuri absorbed them without defending herself, which told Amara everything about how deeply she meant the guilt she'd been performing for months. Go back in, Amara said. Fix your face first. Bathroom, second door on the left from the stairwell exit. I'll be right behind you. Zuri nodded, small and young and wrecked. She gathered her dress and went. Amara stood in the stairwell alone for a moment. She pressed her palms flat against the cool concrete wall and breathed. In, out. The sound of the ventilation system, the distant percussion of music through the floor above her. Completely ordinary things occurring at completely ordinary volume. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she went back in. The remainder of the reception moved around her in layers she processed selectively. She spoke when spoken to. She laughed twice at things that were actually funny. She watched Tae-hyun navigate his own event with the competence of someone who had held rooms larger than this, under far worse conditions, and she understood that the specific ache she felt watching him was not love anymore. It had passed through something on the way to wherever it was going, and what it was now was more like recognizing a building you used to live in from a distance, feeling something about the shape of it, not being able to go inside. She was at a corner table, alone for a moment, when he appeared. She had known he would. She had been deciding all evening what she would do when he did. Tae-hyun did not sit down. He stood at the edge of her table, jacket still perfect, not a man who showed physical evidence of anything that was happening internally. The toast, he said. Yes. I didn't know what you would say. I know you didn't. I want you to know that He stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen him direct at anyone in 4 years of watching him in rooms full of people who feared him. It was not remorse exactly. Remorse was too simple. It was something more structural. Like someone looking at damage they caused and understanding that understanding the damage doesn't reduce it. I understand what it cost you. You don't, she said, but thank you for saying it. A pause. Neither of them looked away. I need to ask you one thing, she said. And I need you to answer me the way you'd answer it if there were no consequences to the answer. He waited. When did you know? The actual date. When did you know it was her? His jaw moved. She watched him calculate. Not whether to lie. She understood that he wasn't going to lie to her. He had never lied to her directly. But where to locate the exact truth inside a question that had more than one possible answer. August, he said. The 10th. The Busan Project. She had left on August 7th. She had been in Busan for 3 days when he knew. She did the arithmetic without moving a muscle in her face. And you stayed with me for 2 months after that, she said. He exhaled. One controlled breath. I was trying to understand whether it was real. And was it? He didn't answer, which was its own answer. He had married her sister tonight. Okay, Amar said. She picked up her water glass. You should go back to your wife. Something moved across his face that she did not track because she had already looked away. She heard him leave, the particular sound of his footsteps, controlled, unhurried, moving away from her toward the center of the room. She sat with the water glass and didn't drink from it, and looked at nothing for approximately 90 seconds, which was as long as she allowed. Bob. It was past midnight when the reception wound down to its final movement. The guests who remained were the kind who stayed until the formal end of things, either because they had obligations or because they were the type of people for whom leaving early felt like a concession. Amara was neither, but she was still there, sitting at the corner table she had claimed 3 hours ago when her phone buzzed. A message from her director, sent at midnight, which told her something about how he operated. London firm called me directly. Position is still open. They pushed the deadline because they want you specifically. Monday. Let me know. She read it twice, set the phone face down on the table, picked it up, and read it again. Done. The hotel rooftop was accessed through a service elevator that she found by asking a hotel employee who was young enough to be flattered by a direct question from a woman in a good dress. The rooftop was cold and enormous, and lit mostly by the city below. Seoul at midnight, which meant it was still bright enough to read by from up here, the accumulated light of 7 million windows. She had not planned to come here. She had followed an instinct about air and space, and the particular need to be somewhere that didn't have carpeting and chandeliers and 500 people performing their best versions of themselves for each other. She stood at the railing and looked out at the Han River from above. From this height, it looked like a black scar across the city. She thought about the bench near the Mapo Bridge, where she had sat 2 months ago, and given herself 10 minutes to think about his hands. She didn't think about his hands tonight. She thought about London. She was still thinking about it when she heard the service elevator. She knew before she turned that it was Zuri. The footsteps were wrong for Tae-hyun's security team, and wrong for any hotel employee who would have used the stairs. Zuri appeared from the elevator alcove still in the wedding dress, holding her heels in one hand, walking across the rooftop in bare feet on cold concrete, and the image was so specifically her sister. The impracticality, the impulse, the complete absence of self-consciousness about the cold rooftop under her bare feet, when she had decided she needed to be somewhere, that Amara felt something shift in her chest despite everything. "How did you know I was up here?" "I didn't." Zuri came to stand beside her at the railing, set her heels down on the concrete, looked out at the city. "I came up here because I needed to breathe, and there's a security guard stationed outside our suite, and She exhaled. "I couldn't be inside anymore." They stood for a moment in silence. The city ran below them. Indifferent, enormous, the Han River carrying its black water toward the sea at exactly the pace it had always moved, unbothered by any of this. "Where is he?" Amara asked. "Talking to someone. One of his... someone." Zuri wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "He knows I needed a minute. He sent me a message at the table." "I know, I asked him to." Amara turned to look at her. "You asked him to come talk to me?" "I needed to know..." Zuri stopped, looked at the city instead of at her. "I needed to know if you hated me, and I couldn't ask you myself, not right then. So you sent your husband. He's the only person besides you who I trust to tell me the truth." The specific irony of that sentence sat between them for a second, and then Zuri laughed. Short, painful, completely genuine. "That came out wrong," Zuri said. "It came out exactly right," Amara said. "That's the problem." Zuri looked at her. Her eyes were still swollen, but she had fixed her face in the bathroom downstairs, and now she looked like someone who had been crying and then stopped, which was a different thing from someone who hadn't. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No." "You should. I know that." "I would hate me." "You would," Amara agreed. "You've never been as good at carrying things as you think you are. You would have broken down inside 2 weeks." She said it without cruelty, just fact, the architectural truth of her sister's structure. Zuri absorbed this. "And you're not going to break down." "I didn't say that." "You seem like you're not going to break down." "I seem like a lot of things tonight." Amara turned back to the city. "I'm very good at seeming." A long pause. "I got a job offer," Amara said. Zuri went still. The specific stillness of someone who has heard the first note of a song they recognize and are trying to prepare themselves for the rest of it. "Where?" she said. "London." The city light shimmered off the river. "When?" Zuri asked. "I've been thinking about it for a few weeks. There's a deadline Monday." She kept her eyes on the Han River. "I haven't decided." "Ani." Zuri's voice had gone to a register Amara recognized. The register of someone trying to keep something in place by sheer will. "You can't leave." "I didn't say I was leaving, but you're thinking about it." She didn't answer. "You can't leave," Zuri said again. "You're the only..." She stopped. "You're the only thing here that still feels like home to me, in this whole city. You're the only thing that was here before all of this." "You'll have him," Amara said. "That is not the same thing, and you know it." "No," Amara said. "It's not." She turned to face her sister. Zuri's expression was the face of someone who has just understood something they'd been trying not to understand and is discovering it is exactly as bad as they feared, naked and awful, and entirely without performance. "You're going," Zuri said. "I haven't decided." "You have." Amara looked at her for a long moment, thought about the 10 minutes at the Mapo Bridge, the second suitcase in her car, the London firm that had called her director directly because they wanted her specifically, the blueprint she'd been drawing for a life that no longer matched its ground. "I need you to listen to me," she said. "And I need you to hear what I'm actually saying, not what you're afraid I'm saying." Zuri pressed her lips together, nodded. "There is no version of me that stays in Seoul right now that doesn't poison everything it touches." Amara kept her voice steady. She had had the shape of this thought for weeks and was only now fitting it into words. "I can be your sister from London. I can call you and know what you're doing and love you from a distance that is—" She stopped. "That is survivable for both of us. And if I need you here, you have him." I said that's not— "I know what you said." Her voice sharpened just slightly. "Not anger. Something more precise than anger." "Zuri, you made a choice. 8 months ago you made a choice. And before that you made another choice. And before that another one. Every one of those choices had a consequence, and I am one of them." She held her sister's gaze. "You don't get to ask me to stay and make that easy for you. That's not something I can do." Zuri's face collapsed. Not the polished grief of the ceremony, not the managed tears of the reception. Something that had been held together for 8 months by the combination of guilt and secrecy and desperation and love. All of it giving way at once, on a hotel rooftop, in bare feet, in the wedding dress, at midnight over a city that didn't care. Amara watched her sister cry. She did not move to hold her. Not yet. Because some things need to be felt in full before you interrupt them, and she knew her sister well enough to know that Zuri needed to finish this particular grief before comfort was going to mean anything. So she stood there and watched, and the cold wind off the river moved through her hair, and she felt for the first time all night the first real crack in the structure she had been maintaining. Not collapse. A crack. The kind that tells a structural engineer that the load is real and the building is not made of air. When Zuri's breathing finally steadied, not calm, but past the worst of it, the specific raggedness of someone who has cried enough that their body has started running out of the necessary fuel, Amara crossed the space between them and put her arm around her sister's shoulders. Zuri leaned into her, shaking. "I don't know how to do this without you close," Zuri said. "You'll learn." "I don't want to learn. I know." "Uni." Her sister's voice was barely there, almost gone. "Please don't let this be the last time I see you like this. Not formal visits and Christmas phone calls. Please." Amara held her tighter. She looked out at Seoul. The lights, the river. The 4 years she had lived inside the city, and what they had cost her, and what they had built in her, and what she was going to carry away from here in whatever direction she went next. She thought about Monday, about the deadline, about the South Bank development and the engineering complexity and the firm with the reputation she respected and a skyline she had never drawn a single line against. She thought about the airport, the specific feeling of a departure gate. She thought about what it meant to choose yourself over the ruins of what you had loved. The crack in her chest widened just slightly, letting through a cold draft of something that felt, improbably, like the first molecule of the air she needed to start breathing again. "I'm going to London," she said. Zuri made a sound against her shoulder that was not a word. "And you are going to call me every day," Amara continued, "and I am going to answer, and we are going to fight about it, and then we are going to stop fighting about it, and you are going to send me photographs of whatever plant you inevitably kill in the first month of your marriage, and I will tell you what you did wrong." A sound from Zuri that was closer to a laugh than anything had a right to be up here. "And you're going to be okay," Amara said. "Because you are, despite everything you have done and every terrible decision you have made. You are still the person who held onto my arm in a thunderstorm and asked if the sky was going to break." Zuri pulled back, looked at her, eyes destroyed, face completely open. "Is it?" she asked. "Going to break?" Amara looked at her sister, at the city behind her, at the river that just kept moving regardless. She opened her mouth to answer, and then the rooftop door opened with a sound like a pressure seal releasing, and neither woman turned immediately, and then the quality of Zuri's face changed in a way that told Amara before she saw him who it was. That particular contraction of expression, love and guilt, and fear all running together, the face her sister made for only one person on the planet, and Amara turned and found Tae-hyun standing 10 feet away with his jacket off and his collar open, and an expression she had never seen him wear in 4 years. An expression she did not have a name for and did not want to study long enough to find one. He looked at Zuri first, then at Amara. "There are people looking for you," he said to Zuri, his voice even. "The photographer wants the last formal shot." Zuri wiped her face, nodded. She picked up her heels from the concrete. She looked at Amara with an expression that had too many things in it to name, and then she crossed the rooftop to where her husband was standing. He touched the small of her back as she passed him to reach the door. Automatically. The gesture of someone who had already learned the particular coordinates of another person's body. Amara watched it happen. Then Zuri went through the door and was gone, and Amara was left on the rooftop with Kang Tae-hyun and the city below, and the cold river wind, and 3 months of everything neither of them had said. He did not move toward her. She did not move toward him. For a moment, neither of them said anything at all, which was its own kind of conversation that they had always been fluent in, the two of them. The ability to communicate entire negotiations through the management of silence. She had loved that about him too. The precise, unsentimental intelligence of him. The fact that he never talked around things. "London," he said, not a question, which meant Zuri had told him, or he had heard, or he simply knew her well enough to have arrived at it without being told. "Yes," she said. "When?" "Soon." He absorbed this. His eyes moved to the city below briefly, then back to her. "That's the right decision," he said. She had not expected that. She hadn't known what she'd expected, but it wasn't that. "I know," she said. "It doesn't feel like what I'd want to say." He was looking at her steadily. "But it's true. I didn't come up here to hear what you'd want to say," she told him. "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Is there anything you need from me? Before you go?" "Practically. I can—" "No." She said it without heat. "There's nothing I need from you." He accepted this. The way he accepted most things, not with performance, just with the still competence of someone who has processed information and will act accordingly. "I need to ask you something," she said. He waited. She had been building toward this all evening without knowing it. Through the toast, through the conversation with Zuri, through the crack in her structure that was widening so slowly she'd almost missed it. She had something she needed to say out loud in front of someone who would understand the weight of it, and he was the only person on this rooftop who would. "Did you ever think," she said, "that you'd be the person who made me leave Seoul?" His jaw tightened, slightly. The smallest movement. If she hadn't spent 4 years learning his face, she would have missed it. "No," he said. "I built my whole career here because of you," she said. "I turned down New York. I turned down Singapore. I turned down the Incheon position 3 months ago that I should have taken." She kept her voice level, not accusing, reporting, like reading measurements off a survey. "I made decisions around the shape of your life, and I told myself it was my choice, which it was, which I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not putting that on you. I made those choices. I'm saying that I made them." He was very still. "And now I'm going to London," she said, "and it is the first decision I have made in 4 years that is only about me. And that is—" She exhaled. "That is where we are." The city lights shimmered in the river below. Taehyun looked at her for a long moment. She could see him finding the words, which was rare. He was not usually a person who had to search. "I know what I cost you," he said finally. "I won't tell you I didn't know it at the time. That would be—" He stopped. "I knew. I made choices anyway. I don't have anything to say about that makes it different." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to make it different." "Then what are you asking?" She thought about it. "I'm not asking you anything," she said. "I just needed to say it out loud." He held her gaze. "Then say it," he said. She looked at him. This man she had loved with the absolute and unsentimental entirety of what she had. And she felt the crack in her chest open a half-inch further, and then she felt, under the cold rooftop wind and the weight of Seoul's million lights, the first thing that had felt like solid ground in 3 months. She said, "I deserve better than what you gave me." He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He said, "Yes, you did." And for reasons she would not have been able to explain to anyone, that was the thing that finally broke her open. Not the betrayal, Not the wedding, not the ring on her sister's hand, but those 3 words in his voice, delivered without excuse or deflection, the clean, terrible accuracy of them. She felt her face change, felt the thing she had been holding for 3 months shift toward the surface. She turned away from him before he could see what was happening. "Go back to your wife," she said. She heard him stand there for another 3 seconds. She counted them. Then she heard his footsteps move away across the concrete toward the rooftop door. The door opened. The door closed. And Amara stood alone above Sol with the crack wide open now, something enormous pressing against the inside of her ribs, and the full weight of everything she had survived in the past 3 months gathering itself for the moment she had been refusing to give it. Not yet, she told herself. Not here. She pressed both hands flat against the rooftop railing and looked at the city and breathed and held the line. But she could feel, with the precision of someone who understood structures at a molecular level, that the line was not going to hold much longer. She pulled out her phone, opened the message from her director, and typed, "Monday. I'll take it." She sent it before she could think about it again. Then she put the phone in her pocket and stood there while Seoul blazed below her and the Han River kept moving in the dark, indifferent and continuous, going wherever water goes when it has no more reason to. The message sent at 12:47 a.m., and her director responded at 12:49 a.m., which meant he had been awake waiting for it, which meant he had been more worried about her than his carefully managed professional distance had let him show. "Good. I'll call the London firm first thing. Get some sleep." She stared at those last 3 words for a moment. Get some sleep. The specific absurdity of that instruction on this particular night. She put the phone back in her pocket and stood at the rooftop railing for another 10 minutes, not thinking about anything she could name, just letting the cold work on her until her fingers were numb enough that the sensation became its own information, simple and physical and completely unambiguous. Then she went back inside. The hotel room was a junior suite on the 14th floor that she had booked 3 weeks ago when Zuri had asked her to stay the night after the reception so they could have breakfast together in the morning. At the time, it had seemed like a thing she could manage, a contained time frame with a clear endpoint. Breakfast, then home, then the rest of her life. She let herself in and sat on the edge of the bed without taking off her shoes. The room was the specific kind of expensive quiet that good hotels manufacture. Thick curtains, engineered silence, the feeling of being insulated from the city's actual texture. She had always found hotel rooms slightly alienating, the way they were designed to belong to no one. Tonight, that felt appropriate. She sat for a while. Then she lay back on the bed, still in her dress, still in her shoes, and looked at the ceiling. Sleep did not come. She had known it wouldn't. Her mind was doing what it always did when she had made a significant structural decision, running through every load-bearing element, testing each joint, looking for the place where the weight would fail. London. The South Bank development. A city she had been to twice, for conferences, where she knew no one well enough to call at midnight. She thought about her apartment in Yongsan, the running route along the Han, the cafe on Saturday mornings. She thought about Zuri's face when she said, "I'm going to London," the specific collapse of it. The way her sister's expressions had always been completely legible to her, every layer visible, nothing withheld. The total opposite of Tae Hyun, who had been a practice in reading what wasn't shown. She thought about what he had said. Yes, you did. Clean and without excuse, and delivered like someone paying a debt they'd known about for a long time. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. The crack in her chest was still there, still open. She could feel it with every breath. Not pain exactly, but pressure, the structural awareness of something that had been load-bearing for a long time now operating differently. She had promised herself she would not do this in the hotel room. She had promised herself she would hold the line until she was somewhere private, somewhere she could afford to fall apart, without the falling apart, becoming a thing she had to clean up before checkout. She held the line. Barely. She was still holding it at 2 a.m. when her phone rang. Not Zuri, not her director, a number she didn't recognize. Seoul area code. She stared at it through 2 full rings, the kind of staring that isn't a decision, but is made up of too many small ones to separate out. Then she answered. Miss Okoye. A man's voice. Middle-aged, controlled, with the specific vocal texture of someone accustomed to delivering information in neutral tones, regardless of what the information was. My name is Park Sung-jin. I apologize for the hour. She sat up. Who are you? I work for a firm that handles certain legal and financial matters for clients who require discretion. A pause precisely calibrated to let that land without elaboration. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. I understand you've been going through a difficult period and I delayed contact accordingly, but I'm afraid the timeline has become— Another pause. Urgent. She was fully awake now. Not the jagged half-alertness of bad sleep, but something sharper. The particular attention of someone whose nervous system has identified a pattern before their conscious mind has caught up. What firm? The name wouldn't be meaningful to you directly, but the matter concerns a set of documents that were filed approximately 14 months ago, documents that affect you personally. His voice stayed level. Ms. Okoye, are you aware that your name appears on the registration of a property in Seoul's Gangnam district? A commercial property, approximately 400 square meters, filed under your name and a secondary name as co-owners. The room went very still. No, she said. The filing was made 14 months ago. The secondary name on the registration is Kang Tae-hyun. She stood up from the bed, didn't know she was doing it until she was already standing. That's not possible, she said. I never signed anything. The signature on the filing bears your name and your identification number. However, the man's voice shifted slightly, not losing its neutrality but adding something to it, the layer of someone who has done this long enough to know when information is going to land badly and who is bracing for the aftermath. The reason I'm calling tonight specifically is that the property in question was used as collateral for a significant financial arrangement approximately 6 months ago, and that arrangement has recently drawn the attention of investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. Yifas Ashkimete. The word investigators landed in her chest like a load she hadn't calculated for. What kind of arrangement? She said. I'm not able to give you full details over the phone, but Miss Okoye— For the first time, something moved under the man's professional surface. Not quite urgency, something adjacent to it. Your name is on documents that link you, on paper, to a financial structure that investigators believe was used to move money connected to organized criminal activity. Given Mr. Kang's known associations, Stop. She pressed her hand flat against the hotel room wall. Stop. I need you to— She breathed. Start from the beginning, slowly. He did. It took 11 minutes. By the end of it, she was sitting on the floor of the hotel room with her back against the wall, and her good dress pooled around her, and her phone held to her ear so tightly her fingers had gone white. The property in Gangnam had been registered in her name and Tae-hyun's 14 months ago. The registration had used her identification details, which meant someone had accessed her personal documents, her passport copy, her alien registration card, her seal, without her knowledge or consent. 6 months ago, that property had been put up as collateral for a series of financial transactions that ran through 3 shell companies. The transactions had moved the equivalent of 11 million US dollars through various accounts, and investigators had been quietly building a case for the past 4 months. Her name was on the originating property. Her name was the anchor. Miss Okoye. Park Sung-jin's voice came back from a slight distance, as if he had lowered his phone to check something. I'm telling you this because one of my firm's clients— I cannot tell you who— became aware of the investigation and retained us to inform you independently before you are contacted officially. When? She said. When will I be contacted officially? A pause. My understanding is that investigators plan to visit your registered address on Monday morning. Monday morning? Her director was calling the London firm Monday morning. How much time do I have? She said. I would strongly recommend you speak to a lawyer before Monday. I can provide referrals. I'm not asking about lawyers, I'm asking— She stopped herself, restarted. Is there any possibility that investigators already know the signature isn't mine? Forensic document analysis takes time, and until they have reason to question the authenticity. So right now, on paper, I look like a willing participant. Silence. Yes, he said. She sat on the floor of the hotel room for 4 minutes after she ended the call. 4 minutes was the amount of time her body required to process information of this size before it could be redirected into function. She had learned this about herself in the past, that grief and shock and fury each had their specific timelines, and that trying to compress them below their natural duration produced a kind of cognitive static that made everything worse. So she sat. She breathed. She looked at the hotel room ceiling from the floor, and she felt something she had not felt in the entire 3 months since Tae-hyun had told her his feelings had changed, something that was different in texture and temperature from grief or anger or the cold ache of being left. This was specific. This was targeted. This was the feeling of understanding that you have been used, not left, not outgrown, not even betrayed in the way that had a human face on it, the way Zuri's betrayal had a face, shame and love, and the recognizable features of someone who had made terrible choices for reasons that were at least comprehensible. This was something else, something that had been constructed. 14 months ago, while she had been standing in the penthouse looking at blueprints and waiting for his footsteps, someone had been filing documents in her name. Someone had looked at her identification number and her signature, which Tae-hyun had access to through years of shared administration, lease renewals, the ordinary paperwork of a shared life, and had made a decision. She thought about August. She thought about the 10th, the date he had named when she asked him when he knew. She thought about the property filing 14 months ago. She thought about the timeline. She got up off the floor. The presidential suite was on the 22nd floor. She knew the number because she had helped Zuri choose it 3 weeks ago, had looked at the hotel's floor plans the same way she looked at any building, systematically, with attention to the load-bearing elements. She took the elevator. She stood in the elevator and watched the numbers climb and kept her breathing slow because she understood that what she was about to do required a specific quality of control that would fail completely if she let herself feel the full force of what she was feeling before she got there. She knocked. She waited. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. One of Tae-hyun's men, young, large, the specific blank-faced competence of someone trained not to show surprise regardless of what they were surprised by. He looked at her. "I need to speak to him," she said. "Now." "Ms. Okoye, now," she said again. The word came out with a weight she hadn't planned for it, something that had apparently been building pressure for 4 minutes on the floor of the 14th floor suite and had found its release point. The man held her gaze for 2 seconds, then stepped back. She walked in. The suite was enormous and mostly dark. The city through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided most of the light. She walked through the entry hall and into the main living area and found Tae-hyun standing at the window, still dressed, jacket folded over a chair, the specific stillness of someone who had heard the knock and already understood that whatever was coming through the door was not going to be manageable with ordinary tools. He turned when he heard her. She stopped 6 feet from him. "The Gangnam property," she said. His face changed. It was subtle. If she hadn't spent 4 years learning the specific vocabulary of his expressions, she might have missed it entirely. The slight tightening around the eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in his jaw. Not surprise. Something closer to the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific bill to come due and has just heard it slide under the door, which told her everything. "You knew," she said. "Amara, you knew." Not louder, but different. The difference between a question and a finding. "My name is on a property registration in Gangnam, 14 months ago. Someone used my documents, my identification, my seal, without my consent. And the Financial Crimes Unit is going to be at my apartment Monday morning." The silence in the suite was enormous. "Who filed it?" she said. He was very still. "That's not something I can—" "Who filed it, Tae-hyun? There are things I need to explain. You can explain them by answering the question." She heard her own voice from that same strange distance she had found in the hotel room 3 months ago, when he told her his feelings had changed, except it was different now. Then it had been the distance of someone going into shock. This was the distance of someone who has moved past the possibility of shock into something colder. "Who used my documents?" "It was handled by someone in my legal structure," he said. "Someone who was—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "Someone who was managing a specific set of transactions and identified a name to use that would look legitimate," she said, "because I was a real person with a real address and a real registration number and a real life you had access to." He didn't answer. "For $11 million, she said. "The amount is—" "I heard the amount." She took 1 step toward him. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand that the only thing I have left to lose from you is the truth, so I need you to give it to me straight." She looked at him. "Did you know they used my name? At the time?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. "No?" he said. When did you find out? 8 months ago. 8 months ago, August. She heard herself make a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite anything with a name. A sound her body produced without consulting her. The physiological response to the specific horror of a timeline assembling itself in real time. August, she said. He said nothing. You found out in August that someone in your organization had put my name on a criminal property filing. She watched his face. And that is when you decided to end our relationship. It wasn't only, that is when you decided to end our relationship. Not a question. A reconstruction. She was building it the way she built everything, from the foundation up, identifying what was actually load-bearing versus what had been presented as structure. You were getting out, ahead of the investigation, and you couldn't leave me in place as your partner when my name was already in the documents because that would, she stopped. That would make it look deliberate. If investigators found out we were still together when they started looking, you're simplifying something that was, am I wrong? The city lights moved on the windows behind him. 50 floors of Seoul glittering and indifferent. No, he said, you're not wrong. There it was. She had expected, she realized, to feel something enormous when the answer came. Rage or devastation, or the specific bottom-dropping-out sensation of a structure failing. Instead, she felt something almost like the opposite, a terrible clarity. The sensation of a blueprint finally matching the building, of every measurement she had been carrying around for months, suddenly corresponding to the actual dimensions of what had been built. He had not fallen out of love with her. He had fallen into a problem, and she was in the center of it, and he had removed her from the equation the only way available to him, by ending the relationship before investigators could establish ongoing association, by giving himself and her plausible distance. And then, because the distance was real and the problem with her name was real and the guilt was real, something had actually shifted. Maybe. Or maybe Zuri had been a separate truth running parallel to the strategy. She would never know which had come first, and she understood, looking at him across 6 feet of expensive carpet, that it didn't matter. Both things had happened. Both things were true. And the thing she had believed was the whole story had only ever been the part of it she was allowed to see. The documents, she said. My name on the filing. Can it be proven that the signature was forged? Yes, he said. The original identification copies I had on file. I can provide those to demonstrate the sum. Will you? She said. He looked at her. I'm not asking if it can be done, she said. I'm asking if you will do it. Provide the documentation. Testify if necessary that my signature was used without my knowledge. Put your organization at risk to clear my name. The question sat between them. She watched him calculate. She had always been able to see him do this, the specific quality of his stillness when he was running scenarios, weighing outcomes, identifying the move that protected the most pieces. She had loved his mind for exactly this reason, and she despised it now with the same precision. Yes, he said. Immediately, she said. Before Monday. I'll make the calls tonight. I want documentation by tomorrow morning. She held his gaze. Not a promise. Documents. You'll have them. She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had loved. This man who had constructed 4 years of real and false things so intricately interwoven that she could not, even now, fully separate the one from the other. She thought about the mug held in both hands in the morning, and she thought about the property filing, and she thought about August 10th, and she thought about the toast she had given 3 hours ago, and the crack in her chest that had been widening all night. I need you to understand something, she said, and I need you to just let me say it without explaining anything. He waited. I loved you with everything I had, she said, and you used that. Maybe not all at once, maybe not intentionally in every instance, but the structure of what you let me believe, the future, the life, the version of you that only existed in that apartment with me. You let me build my decisions around something you knew was not the whole truth. She breathed. And I'm going to spend a long time figuring out which parts of the past 4 years were real and which parts were load-bearing lies, and that is going to take me a long time. He was looking at her with the expression she didn't have a name for, the one from the rooftop. It had not changed. I know, he said. I don't want your apology, she said. I want the documents tomorrow morning, and then I want you to stay away from me. Not out of anger, because I cannot build a new life if you keep being part of what I'm standing on. He nodded. Once, the same small nod. She turned to go. Amara? She stopped, did not turn around. I did love you, he said. His voice had lost its professional finish, just slightly, just enough. That part was not strategy. I need you to know that. She stood in the doorway of the suite for a moment. I know, she said, and she walked out, and the door closed behind her, and she stood in the corridor of the 22nd floor of a Seoul hotel at 2:30 in the morning with her whole body shaking. Not from cold, there was no cold here. The corridor was perfectly climate controlled, from the simple biological cost of having held that much together for that long. She pressed her back against the wall. She slid down it slowly until she was sitting on the corridor floor with her knees pulled to her chest and her good dress around her and the fluorescent corridor lights overhead doing what they always did, which was illuminate everything without flattery. She sat there. She did not cry. The tears were there. She could feel them, had felt them building since the rooftop, since the 3 words he had given her, but something else had superseded them, something that had arrived with the phone call and rearranged the entire interior of the night. She had come to this city for a man. She had stayed in this city for a future. And she had almost lost her name, her actual legal identity, the professional record she had built from nothing after their parents died, and there was no safety net. And she had put herself through her last year of architecture school on scholarship and grit, and the particular determination of someone who has decided that the alternative to succeeding is not survivable. She had almost lost all of that, because she had trusted someone with access to her life. She sat in the corridor and breathed and let the shaking run through her until it was done. The way you let a structural vibration dissipate rather than trying to suppress it, because suppression just stores the energy somewhere else and it comes out later in a place you didn't plan for. When the shaking stopped, she was just tired. Completely and specifically tired. The kind that goes below muscle and bone into something more fundamental. She pulled out her phone. There was a message from Zuri sent 20 minutes ago. Are you still in the hotel? Can't sleep. Room 2208 if you need me. Room 2208. 2 floors below the suite where Amara had just dismantled what remained of her understanding of the past 4 years. She looked at the message for a long time, then she typed, I know about the Gangnam property. She watched the 3 dots appear immediately, which meant Zuri had been lying awake with her phone in her hand. The dots disappeared, then reappeared, then a message. Uni, I need to tell you something. I've known for 3 months. Taehyun told me before he told you anything, before he ended things. He told me there was a problem with a property, and your name was involved, and he needed to... Amara stopped reading. She read the first sentence again. I've known for 3 months. Zuri had known, not just about the property. She had known before Taehyun ended things, before the night in the penthouse in the rain, before Amara had shown up at her door with a suitcase thinking she was going to the one safe place left. She had gone to her sister, and her sister had already known. Amara sat on the floor of the hotel corridor and looked at her phone screen and felt something she had never felt before in 27 years of knowing Zuri. Something that was not the ordinary fury of siblings, or the complex grief of betrayal between people who love each other. Something that felt like the ground itself had been replaced with something that only looked like ground. Amara sat on the hotel corridor floor and read the message again. Not because she had misread it the first time, because her mind was performing the specific function of rechecking a measurement that cannot possibly be right before accepting that the measurement is right and the structure is wrong. I've known for 3 months. 3 months. The same 3 months Amara had spent in Zuri's apartment crying without crying, running before dawn, eating rice standing over the counter, building the careful architecture of surviving something she had believed was only one thing when it was actually 2. Her sister had held her through all of it. Her sister had known through all of it. She put the phone in her pocket without responding. She got up off the floor. She took the elevator to the 2nd floor, found the stairwell, and walked the rest of the way down on foot because she needed the physical negotiation of stairs under her feet, something real and resistant and requiring actual muscle to navigate. At the ground floor, she pushed through the lobby without looking at the night staff and walked out into the Seoul street. It was 3 a.m. The city was not asleep. Seoul was never fully asleep, but it was running on its nighttime skeleton. Taxis. A convenience store spilling light onto the sidewalk. The distant sound of something she couldn't identify, low and continuous, the city's own breathing. She walked. She did not have a destination. She walked because the alternative was standing still, and standing still was not something her body was going to permit right now. She walked 2 blocks north and then turned and walked west, and the cold worked on her face and her hands and the thin fabric of her dress, and she let it because physical sensation was one of the few things currently available to her that was simple and honest and did not have a second meaning. Her phone buzzed. Zuri. She did not answer. It buzzed again. Same number. She stopped walking, stood on a Seoul sidewalk at 3 in the morning in a dress she had worn to her sister's wedding, and answered the phone. Where are you? Zuri's voice was raw, not the polished rawness of someone who had been crying at a wedding, something worse, something that had lost all its management. Outside, Amara said. Outside where? Uni, it's 3 in the morning and you're… I know what time it is. Come back inside, please. I need to talk to you. I know you do. Amara, I need you to tell me one thing. She kept her voice level. This was not a decision, exactly. It was more like the only thing her voice was capable of right now, the levelness, because the alternative was a sound she had not made in a very long time, and she was not going to make it on a Seoul sidewalk. One thing, and then I'll come back inside. Silence on the line. Did you know, Amara said, when I came to your door with the suitcase, that night, did you already know about the property? The silence lasted 5 seconds. 5 seconds was all she needed. Yes, Zuri said. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. He had told me 2 days before. 2 days before. Amara had shown up at Zuri's door 2 days after Taehyun had told his new girlfriend, her sister, that there was a legal problem involving Amara's name and he was going to end the relationship. She had knocked on that door, and Zuri had opened it. And Zuri had said, of course, come inside, and had made her tea and held her while she tried not to cry, and had asked all the right questions, and had been, for 3 months, the best possible version of a sister to a woman whose suffering she was partially responsible for having known about in advance. Okay, Amara said. Uni, I'll be up in 10 minutes. She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk for exactly 10 minutes. She watched a taxi pass. She watched the convenience store light. She watched the city run its nighttime skeleton, and she breathed in and out, and she took the specific shape of what she was feeling, and she looked at it directly without naming it, because naming it would make it too large to carry back inside, and she still had to carry it back inside. Then she went back in. Shient. Room 2208 was smaller than she'd expected. A standard room, not a suite, which told her that Zuri had made her own reservation separate from whatever Taehyun had arranged. That detail arrived with its own small weight. Her sister had kept a room of her own on her wedding night, in a hotel where her husband had the presidential suite. She knocked. The door opened immediately. Zuri had been standing behind it. She was still in the wedding dress. No, not the wedding dress. She had changed into a hotel robe at some point, but her hair was still done, or half done, the pins coming out, the careful construction of it loosening at the edges. She looked like someone who had started to take herself apart and then stopped partway through because something had interrupted the process. She looked at Amara the way people look at oncoming things they cannot move away from. Amara walked past her into the room. She sat in the chair by the window. The city outside. Again. Still. Always the city outside. Zuri stayed near the door for a moment, then moved to the edge of the bed and sat. She did not speak. She was waiting, which was smart of her. The first intelligent tactical decision Amara could identify in a timeline that had been defined by the absence of them. Tell me the whole thing, Amara said. From the beginning, the actual beginning. Zuri's hands were in her lap, turned palms up in a gesture that was either surrender or the position of someone too tired to make fists anymore. He came to me in August, she said. You were in Busan. He came to my apartment and he came to you. Yes. Not the other way around. No. Her eyes were steady. She was choosing, Amara could see, to give this straight, not to manage it, not to shape it toward the version that was easiest to receive, just the structure of it, exposed. He came to me. He said there was a problem, that someone in his legal team had filed a property under your name without authorization, and that there was going to be an investigation, and that he needed to end the relationship with you before investigators established recent association. And you said what? I said, Zuri stopped. Her jaw moved. I didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't understand why he was telling me, instead of just telling you. But you understood eventually. He told me that he had feelings for me, that they had developed over the time when you and I were both around him. He said he'd been trying to understand them for months. Her voice was doing something difficult, staying under control through sheer will, the way a wall stays up past its load rating for a while before it doesn't. He said he was ending things with you regardless of me, that the legal situation made it necessary, but that he wanted me to know the other things separately. He told you the property situation first, Amara said, and then he told you he was in love with you. Yes. On the same visit? Yes. Amara looked at her sister. She was building the structure in her head as the pieces came in, not because she needed to keep her mind busy, but because this was genuinely how she processed things, architecturally, identifying which elements were structural and which were decorative. What was structural? Tehan had gone to Zuri with a legal problem and a confession in the same visit. He had known, doing this, that Zuri was Amara's closest person. He had made a choice about what Zuri would do with both pieces of information. He knew you wouldn't tell me, Amara said. Zuri closed her eyes briefly. He knew that if he gave you both things at once, the legal problem and the other thing, you wouldn't tell me about either one. Because telling me about the property meant explaining how you knew, which meant explaining the other thing, which you weren't ready to explain. Zuri's hands in her lap tightened against each other. He used you too, Amar said, not with satisfaction, just as information. He gave you something you couldn't put down without breaking yourself, so you had to carry it. I should have told you, Zuri said. Her voice had finally cracked, not the way it had on the rooftop, the overflow of accumulated feeling. This was different, smaller and more specific. The crack of someone acknowledging something they had known was true for months and had been surviving the knowledge of. I know that. I have known that from the first night. I should have called you in Busan and told you everything. The property, what he said, all of it. Why didn't you? The simplest question, the one that didn't require architecture or reconstruction. Because I was already in love with him, Zuri said, and I was 23 years old, and I was terrified, and I told myself that the legal thing was his problem to handle, and that you would be hurt regardless, and that telling you myself was only... She stopped. I told myself it was only going to be worse if it came from me. That was a lie you told yourself. Yes. You didn't tell me because telling me meant giving him up before you understood if what he felt was real. Zuri did not answer, but she held Amara's gaze, and the honesty in her face was the kind that comes after all the self-protective interpretations have been exhausted, the face of someone who has nothing left to hide behind. Yes, she said. The room held that word. Amara stood up. Zuri's whole body tensed. I'm not going to scream at you, Amara said. She said it because she could see that Zuri was braced for exactly that, and the bracing itself was exhausting to watch. I'm not. But I need you to listen to me and not interrupt and not apologize until I'm finished. Zuri nodded. You let me come to your apartment and fall apart in front of you while you were holding a secret that would have changed everything about how I understood my own situation. Amara's voice was steady. She was aware of what it was costing to keep it steady, and she paid the cost because she needed the words to land with precision, not force. You let me believe that I was safe with you, that your apartment was the one place that was just us, just family, not contaminated by any of this. And it wasn't. It hadn't been for 2 days before I got there. Zuri's eyes were spilling now. She was not making a sound, just sitting there with tears running down her face and absorbing what was true. I rebuilt myself in your apartment, Amar said. I ran every morning, and I went to work, and I ate your food, and I slept in your spare room, and I told myself, at least I still have this. At least this is clean, she breathed. It wasn't. I know, Zuri whispered. That's what I needed to say. Amara stopped. She felt the crack in her chest at full width now, nothing holding it together except the fact that she had decided to stay functional for the duration of this conversation, and she was going to hold that decision. That specific thing. Not the ring, not the wedding, not even the property. That. You let me believe your apartment was safe, and it wasn't. Zuri pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. Amara looked at her younger sister. The hotel robe, the half-dismantled wedding hair, the face she had known since Zuri was born, Every variation of it, including this one. The face of someone who had run completely out of the ability to manage how they appeared and was just sitting in what they'd done. She felt the complex, exhausting truth of loving someone through something unforgivable. She crossed the room. She sat on the bed next to her sister. She did not hold her. Not yet. You're going to have to tell him, Amara said. What I know. What we talked about tonight. Zuri's breathing caught. Not to punish you, Amara said. Because he used both of us. And he needs to understand that you understand that. Whatever your marriage looks like, whatever you build with him, you cannot build it on top of what he did to both of us without acknowledging what it is. He loves me, Zuri said, fierce and small and frightened, the voice of someone saying something they need to be true. I don't doubt that, Amara said. And that's not what I said. Zuri wiped her face, breathed, steadied herself by visible effort. What if he... She stopped. What? What if confronting him changes things? What if it... She couldn't finish it. Then you find out who he is, Amara said. Now, before you've spent 20 years learning it the slow way. A silence. Then Zuri stood up. She was shaking slightly. She picked up her phone from the nightstand. She looked at Amara. Come with me, she said. No. Amara, this one is yours, Amara said. I'll be here when you get back. Something moved across Zuri's face. Fear, determination, the specific expression of someone walking towards something they cannot predict the outcome of and choosing to walk anyway. She looked, in that moment, older than she had looked all night. Older than the wedding photographs would show. The face of someone becoming something they hadn't been before. She left. The door clicked shut. Amara sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the silence of room 2208 and listened to the city outside and waited. 22 minutes. That was how long it took. She knew because she watched the clock on the nightstand with the specific attention of someone who has nothing left to do but measure time and is doing it carefully, the way you measure anything you cannot control. At the 22-minute mark, the door opened. Zuri came back in. Her face was different, not destroyed. She had used up destroyed several hours ago. This was something past that. The face of someone who has had a conversation that rearranged the furniture in every room they were planning to live in and is now standing in the rearranged space trying to figure out where to put their weight. She sat down on the bed next to Amara. For a moment, she didn't say anything. He knew, she said, that I knew. He had known that I knew since the night I first held you in my apartment. He said he could tell from the way I was around you. Her voice was very quiet. He let it go on. He told himself you were safer not knowing, that the further you were from the legal situation, the cleaner it would be for you. She stopped. He was not wrong about that part. No, Amara said. He wasn't. But he was wrong about the rest of it. Yes. Zuri turned to look at her. Her eyes were dry now. The specific dryness of someone who has moved through all the water their body had available for this particular grief and is now in the country on the other side of it. He's going to fix it, she said. The documents. He's making calls right now. He said you'll have everything you need by morning. I know, Amara said. He told me that already. He also said... She stopped. He said to tell you he's sorry, and that he knows what that's worth. Amara looked at her hands in her lap. What did you tell him? She said. When you confronted him. I told him that what he did to you, using your documents, using me, letting both of us carry things we shouldn't have had to carry, was not something I was going to let him not acknowledge. Her voice was steadier than Amara had heard it all night, the steadiness of someone who has just discovered a load-bearing capacity they didn't know they had. I told him that I love him, and I am going to stay with him, and I am going to figure out how to build something real with him, but that he was going to spend the rest of our lives making different choices than the ones that led to tonight. And? He said yes. A long silence. He said yes like he meant it? Amara asked. He said yes like a man who just watched the two women who know him best refuse to let him manage his way out of what he actually is. Something shifted in Zuri's expression, not quite dark and not quite the complicated pride of someone who has just done something hard. He looked scared. I have never seen him look scared before. Good, Amara said. They sat. The city ran outside. Then Amara's phone rang. Unknown number. Different from Park Sung-jin's number. She looked at it. Are you going to answer? Zuri asked. She answered, Ms. Okoye, a woman's voice this time. Precise, official, the kind of voice that was trained to deliver information without emotional register. My name is Detective Investigator Choi Hae-won, Financial Crimes Unit. I apologize for the hour. I'm calling because we've received documentation tonight that was submitted on behalf of Kang Tae-hyun's legal representatives. It pertains to the Gangnam property registration that bears your name. Amara did not look at Zuri. She kept her eyes on the window, the city, the river beyond it, somewhere, carrying its black water. I'm listening, she said. The documentation indicates that the signature on the original filing is inconsistent with a certified copy of your signature from independent records, and that the identification details were obtained without your authorization. We'll need to conduct a formal interview, but I want you to know that based on the preliminary review, you are not currently a subject of our investigation. Not a subject. Not currently. The specific precision of legal language doing what it was designed to do, closing one door while leaving the shape of another one visible. When would you need me for the interview? She said. We can accommodate your schedule given that you're traveling. She stopped. How do you know I'm traveling? A brief pause. Mr. Kang's representatives indicated you had accepted an international position. We can arrange for the interview to be conducted remotely or before your departure, whichever you prefer. He had told them she was leaving. She didn't know what to do with that information yet, so she filed it. I'll arrange something with my lawyer before Monday, she said. Of course. I'll send a contact number to this line. The call ended. She set the phone down on the bed between her and Zuri. Zuri was looking at her. It's going to be okay, Zuri said. Not a reassurance. A question wearing the grammar of a statement. Yes, Amar said. The London job. Still there. Monday. Monday. She looked at her sister. I'm going to need you to do something for me. Zuri straightened slightly. The unconscious physical response to being needed, which had been true of her since she was a child, she organized herself toward it. Anything. I need you to not call me every day for the first month, Amar said. Zuri blinked. I need you to give me space to build something that doesn't have either of you in the architecture. She said it without softness and without cruelty, like reading a specification. Not forever, just long enough for the foundation to set without weight on it. Zuri's face moved through several things. She was not going to argue. Amara could see that she understood at the cellular level that this was not a request she had any standing to push back on. Okay, she said. After a month you can call whenever you want. Okay? And send me pictures of whatever plant you kill. Zuri made a sound that was too exhausted to be a laugh, but was structured like one. They sat together in room 2208 as the Seoul night moved toward dawn. The city outside running on its skeleton, the Han River doing what it had always done, and the two of them doing what they had always done even when everything between them was broken, sitting close enough to feel the warmth of the other person without requiring it to fix anything. At 4:47 a.m., Amara's phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, Documentation, Gangnam Registration, Authorized Release. She opened it. 14 attachments. The certified copies, the expert analysis, the legal declaration, Tae-hyun's own statement, signed, everything she needed. She scrolled through it slowly. She was looking for the load-bearing elements, the things that would hold her name up against the weight of the investigation. They were there, every one of them. He had done what he said he would do, completely and without requiring anything from her in exchange, which she registered as the most uncomplicated thing he had ever given her. She forwarded the entire email to her lawyer. She put the phone down. She looked at her sister, who had fallen asleep sitting up against the headboard with her mouth slightly open and the hotel robe pulled around her and the remains of her wedding hair, a monument to a night that had been more expensive than any of them had budgeted for. Amara got up. She moved Zuri's shoulders gently until she was lying down and pulled the blanket over her and turned off the bedside lamp. She stood in the dark for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and her bag and let herself quietly out of room 2208. In the elevator on the way back to her own floor, she looked at her reflection in the polished metal door. The dress. The hair that had been constructed that morning for a different version of this night. The face of a woman who had been told in the past 4 hours that her legal identity had been compromised, that her sister had known the truth from the beginning, and that the man she had loved had used both of them with sufficient precision that it had taken months to understand the shape of what he'd done. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. She walked to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed again, in the same position she had been in at 2 a.m. when the phone rang, and she looked at the curtained window, and she felt the full weight of the night settling into her body, the way weight always settled eventually. Not in the moment of impact, but in the stillness after, when the structure stops moving and you can finally assess what's still standing. Her name was going to be cleared. The London job was waiting. The documents were sent. Zuri was asleep 2 floors below her. Tae-hyun was in the presidential suite with the weight of what he had done distributed across a marriage that would have to learn to carry it. And she was here. Sitting on the edge of a hotel bed at 5 in the morning with everything she had survived tonight still vibrating at a frequency she couldn't name. She sat with it. The curtained window held the first gray suggestion of dawn. Not light yet, just the city's darkness thinning at the edges. The way grief thins eventually, not disappearing but becoming less opaque. She had been sitting in this position long enough that her lower back had started to register a complaint, and she let it register without doing anything about it because the physical discomfort was honest, and everything else tonight had been so comprehensively dishonest that honest pain felt almost like company. She thought about what was still standing, her name, her license, her professional record, 12 years of it, built from the specific combination of talent and desperation that produces people who are genuinely good at things because the alternative was always too visible, too close. The offer from the London firm. Her own apartment in Yongsan, which she would need to pack up. The running shoes by the door. The blueprints on the kitchen table. The things that had been hers before Kang Tae-hyun and would be hers after him. She stood up. She unzipped the back of the dress, stepped out of it, and hung it on the back of the bathroom door with the same deliberateness she brought to any material thing that had cost money and deserved to be treated accordingly, regardless of the circumstances surrounding its wearing. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time, not inspecting, not performing the ritual of self-assessment that people do after hard nights to determine how much of themselves survived. Just looking. The face of a 31-year-old architect in a Seoul hotel bathroom at 5 in the morning after the longest night of her life. She looked like herself. That was something. She got into bed in the hotel robe and lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and waited for sleep, which arrived approximately 40 minutes later without fanfare, just the simple physiological mercy of a body that had reached its limit and was shutting down the unnecessary systems. She slept until 9:30. When she woke, the room was full of the particular Seoul autumn light she had always found beautiful and was now finding beautiful again from a slight distance, the way you appreciate a city differently when you know you are leaving it. She lay still for a moment, taking inventory. Body, functional, mind, operational. The events of the previous night, present and accounted for, filed in the appropriate structural location, not buried and not in the way. She showered. She ordered breakfast from room service because she was hungry with the specific animal hunger of someone who had burned through everything they had stored and needed basic fuel before they could do anything else. Eggs, toast, coffee that was better than it needed to be. She ate at the small table by the window and watched Seoul arrange itself in the morning light, and she thought about what came next in the practical, sequential way that had always been her most reliable tool. Lawyer, this morning. Her legal contact already had the documentation. She needed to call and brief him before the Financial Crimes Unit reached out directly. Her apartment in Yongsan. She had 6 weeks before the London position started. Time to pack. Time to notify her firm. Time to close the Seoul chapter of her life with the methodical care it deserved. Not fled from, not burned, but properly concluded. Zuri. She poured her second cup of coffee and considered this separately. There was a knock at her door at 10:15. She knew before she opened it. The specific quality of the knock. Tentative but committed. The knock of someone who has decided to do a thing and is doing it before the decision can unravel. Zuri stood in the hallway in her regular clothes. A sweater and jeans she must have had in a bag. Her hair down and still slightly crimped from the night before's pins. No makeup. The face of someone who had also slept a few hours and woken up and chosen to come here first. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the hotel lobby cafe. She held one out. Amara looked at it, looked at her sister. She took the coffee. She stepped back from the doorway. Zuri came in. They sat at the table by the window. Zuri in the chair, Amara on the edge of the bed. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. The city ran outside. Someone on the street below was arguing with a delivery driver. An ordinary Sunday morning argument. No stakes, nothing to lose. How did you sleep? Amara asked. Maybe 3 hours. Zuri wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You? About the same. A pause. He was gone when I woke up, Zuri said. There was a note. He went to meet with his legal team. She looked at the cup in her hands. He left me the name and direct number of the investigator handling your case, with a note that said to give it to you. I already have it. I know, I figured. She looked up. I just wanted you to know he did it anyway. Left it like I might need to be the one to give it to you. Amara understood what Zuri was telling her without Zuri being able to say it directly, that Tae-hyun had found a way, even in that small gesture, to give Zuri a role in Amara's protection. Something to carry toward her sister rather than away from her. It was, she thought, either very calculated or very human. With him, she had never been able to fully separate the two. He's going to be complicated for a long time, Amara said. I know. You understand that? Yes. Zuri's voice was quiet, but not fragile. The voice of someone who has moved through something and is standing on the other side of it in a different posture than they arrived in. I'm not walking into this thinking it's going to be easy. I'm not walking into it thinking I deserve easy. Good. I'm walking into it because he's... She stopped. Because whatever he is, he's also the person I love. And those two things don't cancel each other out. They just both have to be true at the same time. Amara looked at her sister, 23 years old and sitting in a hotel room the morning after her wedding in jeans and a sweater holding a coffee cup with steady hands, saying something real. You're going to be okay, Amara said. I don't know that yet. Neither do I, Amara said. That's what okay means. You don't know it yet, and you go anyway. Zuri looked at her. The morning light on her face, the crimped hair, the particular expression of someone who is very young and has just gotten very old in the space of a single night and is sitting with both versions of themselves simultaneously. I have something to give you, Amara said. She got up. She went to her bag and retrieved the single item she had been carrying for 3 weeks without knowing exactly when the moment would be right. She had found it during the move out of the penthouse, a photograph that had lived on the kitchen shelf that Tae-hyun had returned to her in an envelope without comment when she moved her things. She had meant to throw it out. She had put it in her bag instead. The photograph was from 7 years ago. Atlanta. Their cousin's backyard. Amara was 24, Zuri was 16, and they were standing in the afternoon sun with their arms around each other and squinting at whoever was holding the camera, and Amara was laughing at something, and Zuri was looking up at her with the expression of someone watching something they want to be when they grow up. She held it out. Zuri took it, looked at it. Something crossed her face. You always took care of me, Zuri said. Yes. Even when I didn't deserve it. Especially then, Amara said. That's not going to change. But the version of taking care of you that requires me to be close by, that has to change. For a while. She sat back down on the edge of the bed. You have a husband now. Learn how to be taken care of by him. Learn how to take care of him back. That's what you chose. So choose it fully. Zuri pressed the photograph against her chest. And if it falls apart? She asked. Then you call me and I get on a plane, Amara said. But it's not going to fall apart. You're not as fragile as you think you are. You never were. Zuri looked at her with wet eyes, and the specific expression of someone hearing something they needed to hear said out loud by the specific person who needed to say it. I'm sorry, Zuri said. Not for the first time, but differently than the other times, without the layer of self-protection that apologies usually carry. Just the 2 words, plain and expensive and insufficient and the only thing available. I know you are, Amar said. Does that... Zuri stopped. She was choosing her words with unusual care, which was not natural for her. Zuri had always been someone who said the thing directly and then figured out whether she should have. Does it matter? Sorry. Does it actually... Yes, Amara said. It doesn't fix anything, but it matters. Zuri breathed. Okay, she said. Well, they said goodbye in the hotel lobby at noon. Tae-hyun was there. He had come back while they were finishing their coffee, had knocked on the door and stood in the hallway with his jacket on and the look of a man who has spent a morning doing difficult things and is not finished with them yet. He had looked at Amara and said, The interview is arranged for Thursday. Your lawyer will get the full briefing by end of day. Then he had looked at her for one moment longer, the way he had looked at her on the rooftop, That expression she had no name for, and he had said, "Have a good life, Amara." And she had understood that he meant it with the full weight of someone saying a thing they cannot afford to mean and are saying anyway. She had said, "Take care of her." He had said, "Yes." That was all. In the lobby, Zuri held her for a long time. Longer than was comfortable, long enough that Amara could feel her sister's heart beating against her own chest, and she held her back with both arms and let it last as long as it needed to last, which turned out to be almost a full minute, which was a long time to stand still in a hotel lobby on a Sunday morning. When Zuri finally stepped back, her eyes were swollen, and she was trying to smile and mostly managing it. "1 month," she said. "1 month," Amara confirmed. "Then you can call whenever you want." "What if I see a really funny plant?" "Then you take a picture of it and you wait." Zuri laughed. The real laugh. The one that came without permission. The one Amara had been hearing since Zuri was old enough to find things funny. It lasted about 3 seconds, and then Zuri pressed her hand over her mouth and shook her head. "Go," Amara said, "before one of us changes our mind." Zuri went. She walked across the lobby and through the door, and Taehyun was waiting outside, and he touched the small of her back as she reached him, automatically, and they walked away together into the ordinary Seoul Sunday, and Amara watched until they turned the corner and were gone. Then she stood in the hotel lobby alone for a moment. Then she went upstairs, packed her overnight bag with the efficiency of someone who has been packing bags in difficult circumstances for long enough that it requires no emotional overhead, and checked out. The week that followed was the kind of week that looks, from the outside, like logistics, and is actually something else entirely. She called her lawyer Monday morning. The interview with the Financial Crimes Unit was scheduled for Thursday by video, which her lawyer attended with her, and which lasted 90 minutes. And at the end of which the investigator told her that the evidence supporting the authenticity dispute was comprehensive and that she could expect to be formally cleared within 2 to 3 weeks. She thanked the investigator without feeling much, because relief at that scale doesn't arrive immediately. It arrives later, in smaller installments, when you're doing something ordinary and suddenly realize you're not bracing for anything. She told her director Tuesday. He sat across from her in the conference room with his hands flat on the table and listened to her explain that she was taking the London position and that she was giving 6 weeks' notice. And then he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I should have pushed you harder on Singapore 2 years ago," which was the most personal thing he had ever said to her, and which she received without knowing quite what to do with it. She said, "You would have pushed. I wouldn't have gone." He said, "That's probably true." She spent the evenings of that week in her Yongsan apartment packing. She had more than she realized. The accumulation of a life built in a city she had meant to stay in forever, all the material evidence of permanence. She was systematic about it. Keep, donate, ship to London, leave behind. The architectural drawings from her first Seoul project she boxed carefully. The plants she had kept alive for 3 years she gave to her neighbor, a woman in her 60s who had watered them twice when Amar was traveling, and who received them with the satisfaction of someone who had always suspected they were being underloved. She kept the running shoes. She did not keep the photograph of herself and Taehyun that she found at the back of a desk drawer, taken at some restaurant 2 years ago where they had gone for her birthday. Both of them slightly dressed up, his hand on the back of her chair, her leaning toward whatever he was saying. She looked at it for a full minute. She put it in the recycling, not with anger, just with the understanding that some things are not useful to carry forward, and that this was one of them. On her last morning in Seoul, she ran. She ran her old route along the Han River before the city got loud, in the gray pre-dawn when the water was dark and the light was undecided and there were only other runners and the occasional delivery driver and the accumulated silence of a city not yet fully awake. She ran for 60 minutes. Her body knew the route completely. Every turn, every incline, every bench, the specific feel of the path surface under her feet at each section. The knowledge of a body that has moved through a place enough times that the movement itself becomes a kind of fluency. She ran past the bench near the Mapo Bridge where she had sat 2 months ago and given herself 10 minutes to think about his hands. She did not stop. She kept running. When she got back to the apartment, the sun was fully up and Seoul was making all its ordinary noise. She showered, she made coffee, she stood at the kitchen window drinking it and looked out at the building across the alley, and the woman on the 4th floor who was not washing dishes this morning, but was watering a plant on the windowsill, and Amara watched her water the plant with the careful attention of someone who has decided that this particular living thing is going to survive. And she thought about Zuri and the photographs of killed plants she would receive in a month. And she smiled at the window at no one. She set down her coffee cup. She picked up her passport. She picked up the carry-on bag that held everything she needed for the first 2 weeks in London because the rest was being shipped. She took one last look at the apartment, empty now except for the things she was leaving for the building manager to clear. The kitchen. The blueprint table with its clean surface. The window with its view of the alley and the building opposite, and the very small piece of sky available between them. She had built a life in this apartment. Not a perfect one. Not the one she had imagined when she arrived in Seoul 7 years ago, with 2 suitcases and a job offer, and the particular confidence of someone who did not yet know what this city was going to cost her. A real one, though, with real weight and real dimensions and real load-bearing elements that had held up under more than she had designed them for. She was going to build another one. Different city, different skyline, different ground conditions, which would require a different foundation, which she would figure out when she was standing on it, the way you always figured out foundations, from the actual material, not from the idea of it. She closed the door behind her. Incheon International Airport on a Wednesday afternoon was its own specific world. The controlled chaos of 500 individual departures occurring simultaneously, each one the center of its own universe, most of them invisible to all the others. She moved through check-in and security with the practiced efficiency of someone who traveled enough that airports had become a procedural space rather than an emotional one. Usually. Today the airport felt different, not overwhelming, just present. She noticed things she usually processed below the level of consciousness. The specific quality of the terminal light, the sound of rolling luggage on polished floors, a child sleeping against a woman's shoulder in the gate waiting area, completely out. The total animal trust of a person whose body has decided that this shoulder is safe regardless of what is happening around it. She sat at her gate with her carry-on between her feet and her boarding pass on the small screen of her phone, and 40 minutes until boarding. She thought about what she was leaving, not with grief, with the specific acknowledgement that things you love and things that cost you are sometimes the same things, and that leaving them does not require you to revise how you felt about them. Seoul had cost her enormously. She had also loved it with the particular intensity of a city that had been where she became the full version of herself, professionally and otherwise. Both things were true. Both things were hers to keep. She thought about Tae-hyun. She gave herself the 10 minutes she always allowed. Not the 10 minutes of the bench at the Mapo Bridge, which had been about grief, about the specific absence of him. This was different. This was the 10 minutes of someone who is about to board a plane and has decided to look directly at the thing one more time before the gate closes. She thought about August 10th. She thought about the documents. She thought about the specific competence with which he had constructed a situation that protected him at the cost of both the women who loved him and the specific competence with which he had then dismantled it when given no other option, and the way those two competences were not separate things but the same thing, the same mind, operating in the same direction, which was always toward survival, and never more than sometimes toward the people around him. She thought about, yes, you did. She thought about the fact that she had loved a man who was genuinely capable of saying that, and genuinely capable of everything that had preceded it, and that these were not contradictions to be resolved, but simply the accurate shape of who he was. She thought about Zuri, the 4-year-old in the thunderstorm, the 16-year-old in the photograph, the 23-year-old in the hotel robe with coffee from the lobby cafe, choosing to walk toward a difficult thing rather than away from it. Her sister had made terrible choices. Her sister was going to make more of them, because people who feel everything at maximum volume do not become cautious people. They become people who feel the consequences of their choices at maximum volume too, which is its own education. She was going to be on the other end of the phone for that education, just from a different city. From a city where the skyline was unfamiliar and the ground conditions were unknown, and she was going to build something new against all of it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Zuri. No words, just a photograph. A small succulent in a terracotta pot on what appeared to be a hotel windowsill. Still alive, just barely. One section of it slightly brown at the tip, the specific look of a plant that had been overwatered by someone who was trying too hard. Beneath it, 3 words. I saved it. Then immediately another message. It's suffering, but it's alive. Then, I think that's a metaphor. Amara stared at her phone screen for a moment. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. Not the 3-second version from the hotel lobby, but something fuller, something that moved through her chest and loosened something that had been held tightly for long enough that the loosening felt structural, like watching a building settle properly into its foundation after the scaffolding comes down. She typed back, "You're supposed to wait a month." The reply was immediate. "The plant is an emergency." She shook her head. She was still smiling. She put the phone in her bag. The gate screen updated. Boarding. She gathered her carry-on. She joined the line. She moved through it with the other passengers, all their rolling bags and sleep pillows and noise-canceling headphones, all their individual departures and arrivals, and the lives they were carrying between the two. At the door of the jetway, she stopped. Not long. 10 seconds, maybe less. The kind of pause that isn't visible from behind, that doesn't hold up the line. Just the pause of someone who has decided to mark something, to let themselves understand what they are doing in the moment of doing it, rather than reconstructing it later. She was leaving Seoul. She was leaving the Han River and the running route and the gray pre-dawn and the bench at the Mapo Bridge and the woman on the 4th floor across the alley who watered her plants carefully because she had decided they were worth the care. She was leaving her sister's voice at ground level and taking it with her at altitude, which was different but was not absence. She was leaving the version of herself that had built a life around the coordinates of someone else's existence, and she was taking with her the version that had survived finding out what that cost. She was leaving the city where Kang Tae-hyun walked and breathed and made his choices, and would go on making them. And she was taking with her nothing he had given her and everything she had built in his vicinity that was genuinely hers, the work, the runtimes, the architectural knowledge of what she was capable of under load. She moved through the door. The jetway, the plane door, the cabin with its overhead lights and the attendant who checked her boarding pass and said something pleasant that she responded to automatically. Her seat, window, the tarmac visible outside and the sky above the tarmac, the particular gray-blue of a Seoul autumn afternoon beginning its slide toward evening. She stowed her carry-on. She sat down. She buckled. She looked out the window. The ground crew moved below, their orange vests bright against the tarmac, each of them with a specific job in the sequence that had to happen before anything could become airborne. She watched them do it. There was something she always found steadying about watching the machinery of departure operate correctly. The checks and counterchecks, the precision of it, the absolute requirement that every load-bearing element be verified before any weight was trusted to the air. The plane began to move. She felt the familiar shift, the slow pivot away from the gate, the acceleration, the city running alongside outside the window, and then dropping back, and then the particular moment of lift when the ground releases you, and the only thing between you and whatever comes next is the physics of trust, which is not nothing, which is actually the only thing, which is the same thing you needed all along. Seoul fell away below. She watched it until the cloud cover took it. Then she looked at the back of the seat in front of her. She breathed. In, out, simple. Her hands rested open on her thighs, not holding anything, not gripping the armrests, just resting, the hands of someone who has put down the weight of the last 4 years and is sitting in the specific lightness that comes after, which is not happiness exactly, not yet, but is the necessary condition for it. The empty hands, the cleared ground, the structural possibility of something that hasn't been built yet. The plane climbed. London was 9 hours and 40 minutes away. She closed her eyes. She did not think about what she was flying toward. There would be time for that. Months of it. The slow accumulation of a new city under her feet, new ground conditions, new load calculations, the incremental process of building a life in a place that owed her nothing and would require her to earn every inch of it. There would be time. Right now she let the plane carry her. Right now she let herself be a woman in the air between one thing and another, which is a temporary position, which is the only position from which anything new has ever been built. The suspension between what was and what hasn't happened yet, the specific altitude of the moment before you know what the ground will feel like. She had been here before. She knew how to land.